plane into the building.
What was the reaction among the people you were with when you saw that second airplane hit?
You know, I was really kind of by myself at that point in time, and I think once again, just total shock is what really was, you know, a lot of people were obviously very concerned, very hysterical at that point in time, maybe realizing and having it finally sink in the severity of what was going on. But until that point in time, people didn't know if it was a fire, if, you know, people just didn't know until I think that second airplane hit.
And did you tell yourself then, as your thoughts cleared, that this was a deliberate act, that you were under attack?
Clearly, I think at that point in time, I saw for about 10 or 15 seconds the sound of the engines, and I actually saw the aircraft hit into the number 2 World Trade Center. That aircraft, unaffected, went right into that building and never tried to veer off course.
Were you anywhere near the towers when they began to collapse?
No, fortunately, I think at that point in time I was on the FDR Drive, almost to the Triborough Bridge, with a friend of mine who drove into Manhattan, and we had heard on the radio that the buildings were collapsed, and when we came over the Triborough Bridge at that point in time in his car, we looked off to the south to our right, and we saw what was left of the buildings, and at that point in time was just in total shock of you know, the severity of where we were, and fortunate that we were long gone.
Well, we thank you very much for sharing your experience with us, and we are awfully glad that you got out of that building safely. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Katie McGee is standing by right now at Shadow Traffic. Let's check in with Katie and see what the situation is around the area. Katie?
Chuck, I've got to tell you, this situation has literally been changing minute to minute since about 9 o'clock this morning. What we have for you are some of the latest updates. Now, if you take a look right now at our Panasonic Skycam, you get a nice shot here of the Cross Bronx heading into the GWB. For most of the day, trying to get outbound at the George Washington Bridge, everything was closed down. I'd say about half an hour, 40 minutes ago, they reopened the outbound upper level only of the George Washington Bridge. So the traffic you're seeing on the Cross Bronx right now, that's everybody that has been waiting all day long to get there. Now, you're still going to find inbound GW Bridge closed, inbound Lincoln and Holland tunnels, they are closed down as well. Now, just to get to the latest at some of the other bridges, up at the Upper East River, Throgs Neck, Whitestone, Triborough bridges open into Queens only. Further down the East River, the Queens Midtown Tunnel, the 59th Street Bridge, Queens-bound traffic only. Lower East River, Brooklyn Bridge and the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel are closed in both directions. Williamsburg Bridge, Manhattan Bridge, those are going to be open, as you can see. This pedestrian traffic only heading into Brooklyn. And this has just been an amazing sight all afternoon as you just see everyone travel across the Manhattan Bridge heading back into the city this after a day where we have seen so much destruction. Some other bridges to update you on. Verrazano open into Staten Island only. Other Staten Island bridge crossings, Bayonne, Outer Bridge, Goethals, New Jersey bound only. Transit updates. These are really going to help you if you have been in the city all day and need to get home.
Deaths below. No word from here on the numbers of deaths or injured, but certainly we've been hearing as many as 10,000 people, and it'll be a while before they can get to many of them. Back to you in the studio.
Correspondent Rick Leventhal. Rick, thank you for the update. We have more information coming in as to the U.S. military response to this. Not only have some fairly innocuous places like any of the major national monuments been closed down, and even theme parks like the Disney World, Disneyland, they've been closed down too. But they also have closed the border between the United States and Canada, the border between the United States and Mexico. We are now just getting information that it is the USS John F. Kennedy and the USS George Washington that have now been deployed to New York Harbor. We also understand that there will be amphibious ships, guided missile cruisers, and guided missile destroyers that are all also being deployed. Where they will be sent, it's not clear right now. We are expecting a briefing from the Pentagon, actually not from inside the Pentagon, but from Pentagon officials. In a matter of a couple of minutes, that will clarify exactly what they're doing. But now, in addition to the Pentagon being at ThreatCon Delta, we understand that Navy installations all up and down the East Coast have also been put on ThreatCon Delta. That is the highest level of alert for the U.S. military. With the aircraft carriers coming into New York to help with some of the hospital response, we take it now to correspondent Molly Falconer, who is at one of the hospitals in New York City that is completely overwhelmed. Molly?
It's a hospital in chaos. It's been ground zero for the injured here all morning. We've been watching stretchers going in and out of the hospital, some horrifying scenes. And right now we are seeing some of the emergency medical supplies. They're just overwhelmed here, so we've been seeing 18-wheeler trucks just being brought in down the streets of Manhattan. As you can see, they're parked over across the street from St. Vincent's Hospital. That's a medical center that's handling over 100 of the dead, injured, and very badly burned here today. Basically, they ran out of supplies. They ran out of blood. They ran out of something called Silvadine, which treats burns. They have been raiding local pharmacies for more of that. They didn't have enough, so apparently now they've had more medical supplies brought in. As you can see, the sirens are going up and down the street right here. They have closed off all of 7th Avenue. That's one of the main thoroughfares in Manhattan. It runs right by the hospital. It also runs all the way down to Wall Street. So they are using this as an emergency corridor to ferry up the wounded and other casualties of this horrifying attack. We've been seeing police officers coming up and down here. The mayor was speeding by here earlier today. Also, New York City yellow cabs have been commandeered to bring in doctors and nurses. We've been seeing them come up and down here, going both ways on the street all this morning. Also, New York City buses are busing in loads of doctors and nurses. They are calling now, hospital personnel are calling for clothing, because so many of the victims have had their clothing blown off them that they need extra shirts, pants, shoes, anything you have. They're asking for it here at St. Vincent's. They're also asking for type O positive blood. You can see behind me also the crowds are just waiting here for words of their loved ones. There is a makeshift information booth. I don't know if you can see that sign. It's just hand lettered. Things are happening so fast down here that they're trying to get the information out as fast as they possibly can. They set up a makeshift, almost card table, and a yellow sign just stuck on the wall of the hospital to let people know where the dead and injured are today. We were supposed to have a briefing about this at about 3 o'clock. Apparently, hospital staff are just so overwhelmed that they had to push that back until 4 o'clock, and we'll bring you the latest word from that as we know it. That briefing, again, has been pushed back until 4 o'clock. Hospital personnel just overwhelmed. They couldn't get it to us in time at 3 o'clock. But here's what we know. Over 100 injured, wounded, possibly dead are inside St. Vincent's. They have commandeered everything from hospital corridors to the hospital gym to serve as makeshift ERs. The entire trauma staff is on alert. They have a disaster plan in action. I talked to a doctor or two who was in there this morning. They said that things are actually pretty calm, that people have been trained for this, and they are doing exactly what they have been trained to do. They are dealing with the casualties as best they can, and apparently that effort is going well. But the problem has been supplies. Those are being trucked in as we speak. We just saw one of the pharmacies and food operations around here. They've been donating water. They've been donating sandwiches. That's just getting wheeled across the streets. As you can see, construction personnel are here to add more barriers to what is just sort of a siege mentality at the hospital. We've seen police lock this place down as if there is a bomb threat. There is not anything like that, but it is being treated as a scene of great trauma. Also, we should tell you that Cardinal Egan was here and may still be here. He is the Archbishop of New York. He has been offering prayers for all of the dead and wounded who have been streaming in and out of this hospital. He has been on scene along with other chaplains and spiritual leaders, as well as city leaders. We talked to the city controller, Alan Hevesy, earlier, who was talking about how there was hundreds of firefighters and policemen who started running towards one of the towers right after one of the disasters, and then they were not heard of again. He was down here to donate blood, but we are also hearing about the fate of those firemen and police officers who ran towards one of the towers in a rescue effort. And as you can hear, the dead and wounded keep coming in. There's more NYPD personnel streaming down this closed-off 7th Avenue. We should also tell you that this entire block area has been locked down, so if you have friends, relatives that you want to check in on, you have to call St. Vincent's Hospital. Listen in for the briefing later that they are saying now is at 4 o'clock, or call Cornell Medical Center, NYU, or any of the other burn centers within Manhattan. There are over 50 that are handling the massive amounts of casualties. We'll bring you the latest as we have it. Back to you.
All right, Molly Falconer, thanks very much. Want to bring you the latest bird's eye view of what's going on, at least in Manhattan, from our Dari Alexander, who is on the roof of our building here in Midtown. Dari?
Hello. You know, I just have to stop for a second and tell you, I was downstairs earlier. I was raised in New York. I am a New Yorker. I have to tell you that this is absolutely devastating to New Yorkers to see the two tallest buildings that were tourist sites go down, to be hit by planes, not by accident, and then to see them crumble. It is an absolutely devastating thing. New Yorkers think of themselves as being strong, invincible. To To see the city taken under siege like this is just, it is absolutely too much to handle. I was downstairs earlier and I was talking to people who were standing all around Fox Central to get the absolute latest. And everybody is just in shock. Nobody can believe that this is actually happening. Let's just take a look once again straight south at these two buildings. The smoke, just billowing, smoke throughout the sky. The Twin Towers were a great place to get a view of New York City skyline, to get a view of the harbor, the Statue of Liberty. Something else that was in that building, I know we talked about banking and security and all different businesses in that building. A famous restaurant, Windows on the World. I took a wine class there back in the early 90s. A fabulous, beautiful restaurant where people used to go to eat so they could see New York City. This was definitely a mainstay. People will not, it will take forever to get over it. I know a lot of people have been talking about the fact that some people knew some people who were in the building, others didn't know people in the building, but once again, this is something that everybody in New York feels, whether or not you knew them. The other thing that is just incredible is to think that there are warplanes flying all over the sky throughout New York City. And I mean, this is not an air show. This is serious. The city is under siege, and we are seeing warplanes fly across the skies every few minutes.
All right, Daria Alexander, there on the roof of our building. Thanks very much. Yes, the entire air system in our nation has been shut down. No airplanes anywhere being allowed to take off. Those that were in the air today when this horrific terrorist attack went down were ordered to land immediately.
All right, we want to get more information as to who senior officials may think will be found responsible for this horrible act of terrorism. We want to go now on the phone to Lawrence Korb. He was the Assistant Secretary of Defense under Ronald Reagan. He is currently at the Council on Foreign Relations. Mr. Korb, thanks for being with us.
Nice to be with you.
We understand that at least 3 Palestinian groups, Hamas, the Islamic Jihad, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, they have all denied any responsibility for these terrorist acts. Some, actually a number of terrorist experts have said that they believe it is the work of Osama bin Laden. What do you think?
Well, he certainly has said he was going to do something, and so that would be logical to expect him to do it. We don't have any proof yet, but I imagine, given the fact that people had to get on these planes and buy tickets and stuff, we'll be able to establish that pretty clearly within a short amount of time.
I want to explain something to our viewers as they see this on the screen. Yasser Arafat, who is the Palestinian leader, has come out also condemning the attack and saying that he personally and his organization is shocked and horrified. So let us not misunderstand the pictures that we see on the screen. These are some Palestinians in parts of Israel celebrating the attack. We should make it clear that this is separate from the official response of Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat. Mr. Korb, a question about what we do in terms of a military response. People have already begun talking about when we are likely to respond, how we are likely to respond. From your term as the Assistant Secretary of Defense, explain to us how something like this works in terms of a response at the Pentagon.
Well, you have to find out who did it and how you can get to them, but it's much easier said than done. We still haven't held anybody responsible for the blowing up of the USS Cole, the ship in Aden. We haven't punished those who blew up the Khobar Tower. That's the problem. It's not an individual nation. These are groups that cut across nations, and it's very, very hard to decide where to retaliate. They also hide themselves among civilians. This is not a large army. This is comparatively small groups of people, and that's going to be the frustrating thing. We're going to want to do something, and it's going to be very hard to do it. When I was in government, we never were able to successfully retaliate for those who blew up the Marine barracks in Beirut in 1983. We never really did get those who did it.
Right. I want to ask you about something that we saw today. Fairly quickly after we saw these attacks, we saw the leaders of the Taliban government of Afghanistan rushing essentially out to cameras to condemn the attack. Even one of them said that he believed it was impossible for Osama bin Laden to have any sort of involvement with it. If one were being skeptical, one might think that they were simply trying to save their own necks because the United States government would be looking directly at Afghanistan for harboring bin Laden for so long.
Well, there's no doubt about that. The problem you're going to face is that it's going to be hard to establish a definite link between these people and bin Laden. I mean, bin Laden, doesn't hold group meetings, in his basement once a week. I mean, these are people that are connected to him with several cutouts all over the world. And as we saw in the recent trial here in New York City, for those who blew up the American embassies in Africa back in '98, some of them said they were connected, others did not, and we couldn't bring him to trial. But there's no doubt that the Taliban government in Afghanistan doesn't want to be held responsible, because if this were directed by them or they had any complicity, we would have every right to go and basically inflict terrible damage on them.
And just to reiterate, the pictures that you're seeing on your screen today were taken in Palestinian neighborhoods. Palestinians there celebrating this strike at America. As Linda said earlier, Yasser Arafat, the Palestine Liberation Authority leader, condemned the attacks, but that is not preventing this outpouring of great joy, if you want to call it that, among Palestinian people who doubtless see this as a strike against the hated enemy, America. So these pictures taken earlier today in Palestinian areas.
We take it back to Larry Korb, who's graciously joining us on the phone and helping us understand exactly how the U.S. military would formulate a response. Larry, even though Osama bin Laden wasn't necessarily considered a force during the Reagan administration, certainly you had procedures in place for how to coordinate a response to a terrorist attack. What were they?
Well, obviously, but there are things that you can do, but you have to know who to respond against,
right.
And that's the problem.
But I mean, in terms of sort of, do you have the National Military Command Center in the basement of the Pentagon? Are they
Well, yeah,
leading?
obviously. I mean, what you do then is you have the forces in the area. Most probably you would have ships with cruise missiles or planes with cruise missiles that would attack. Remember, we did attack bin Laden after the blowing up of the embassies in Africa in 1998. We did attack his camp.
Right.
So, yes, I mean, we have forces all around the world. We have bombers that can fly from the United States that attack any place in the world. So that's probably what we would do if we found the people. But that's the problem you have in this new era, that these groups don't belong to any one nation, and there's no real central headquarters that you can hit.
Also, you generally, as I understand it, you, meaning the Pentagon, I mean leaders at the Pentagon, have a list of response targets already prepared before an attack ever occurs against the United States. There's already a list that you deploy when given the go-ahead by the White House, correct?
Well, that's right. I mean, you have a number. I mean, we have very good intelligence. Our technical intelligence is terrific. We know where these people are, and if we can make a link, yes, then we can go ahead and go after them. The problem is making that link, because the United States stands for decency in the world, and innocent until you're proven guilty. So it's hard for us to do some of the things that I think the relatives of these poor folks in New York today are going to want us to do because of the procedures that we follow.
Right. Now, I want to take you back again to a statement of a Taliban official, obviously the Taliban government being that in charge of Afghanistan. He said, quote, bin Laden does not have the facilities to orchestrate such a major assault within the United States. Some other terrorism experts are saying that he may be the only person who has the kind of organization to orchestrate this kind of attack. Where do you stand?
Yeah, I think he's the only one. And remember, we're not talking, I mean, he didn't buy missiles or anything like that. What they basically did was hijack 4 airplanes.
Right.
And he certainly has the wherewithal to do that.
Now, the ultimate go-ahead for any sort of strike, when it comes, if it is determined fairly clearly that we have figured out who is responsible for this, how does the chain of command work? I mean, who gives the go-ahead, and where does it have to sort of, does it originate from the top, from the commander-in-chief, the president?
Right. Only the president can order military action, and then he sends the order.
Lots of people have just pulled over to the side of the road and are sort of sitting there. Some have gotten binoculars from who knows where. I talked to a few of them. They said they didn't know where they were going to go because the turnpike was closed. I just got here to the train station because reports had been that perhaps train service was starting up again. In fact, it is starting leaving the city, and they made that announcement, which was greeted by
watch my back.
Smiles and quiet nods of the head from people who are clearly waiting for loved ones to come out of New York City. But There's still no service into New York City, and the island remains pretty much an island. I talked to Woodbridge.
Alec, let me stop you there. Thank you for the snapshot. Keep working your way here. We could use the help. Judy Woodruff in Washington. Judy, what do you got?
Aaron, joining us now, our congressional correspondent Kate Snow for an update on what some members of Congress have been doing. We know they've been evacuated from the Capitol building, but Kate, you've been learning about some of their assessment of what's happened. I'm sorry, we don't have that audio connection with Kate. I can report that sources are telling CNN's national security correspondent David Ensor that there are, quote, good indications that people with links to the Osama bin Laden organization are responsible for today's attacks. We can't do much better right now at identifying these sources, but again, they're saying good indications. And this is, again, no proof, but this is very much in line with what high-ranking people have been telling us throughout this day, all the way from former NATO Commander Wesley Clark. General Wesley Clark told us hours ago, and then again just a few moments ago, we spoke with him just a few moments ago. He said that there are very few organizations that would have the sophistication, the financial resources, the organization, the network of contacts to carry out an attack this sophisticated, this organized, where you have planes hitting these key locations in New York City and Washington, the Pentagon, within just minutes of one another. People who could take over the cockpit of an airplane and presumably push the pilot aside. We can't imagine that any pilot would knowingly fly an airplane into the Pentagon or into any place where there were people. That some of these people with connections to the terrorist organizations must have been at the cockpit. Joining us now, and I believe he is in a studio, George Terwilliger, who has had a career of following the activities of intelligence organization, has become an expert on terrorist activities. I'm sorry, we're not going to go to George Terwilliger. We're going to go to White House spokeswoman, Counselor Karen Hughes in Omaha.
And I'm here to update you all on the activities of the federal government in response to this morning's attacks on our country. As you heard from President Bush a short time ago, the federal government is acting to help local communities with search and rescue and emergency management operations, to take all appropriate precautions to protect our citizens, and to identify those responsible for these despicable attacks on the American people. While some federal buildings have been evacuated for security reasons and to protect our workers, your federal government continues to function effectively. We have a federal emergency response plan, and at President Bush's direction, we are implementing it. We began to implement it immediately after the first attack in New York this morning. We contacted American forces and embassies throughout the world and placed them on high alert. The United States Secret Service immediately secured the President, the Vice President, and the Speaker of the House, and they are all safe. They have also secured members of the National Security Team, the President's Cabinet, and senior staff. As you know, President Bush was in Sarasota, Florida when the first attack occurred this morning. Air Force One has now landed at Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, Nebraska, and the President is in a secure location. He is in continuous communication with the Vice President and key members of his cabinet and national security team. Vice President Cheney and our National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, are in a secure facility at the White House. I have just come from there. The Secretary of Transportation and other members of our White House senior staff are gathered at a command center there, and we are coordinating with other branches of our federal government. The Secretary of Defense remains at the Pentagon. and the Secretary of State is en route back to Washington from his trip to South America. President Bush is conducting a meeting of the National Security Council as we speak. They are meeting President Bush from his location and other members from different locations in Washington and other locations. As many of you have been reporting, the Federal Aviation Administration ordered all airports closed, and all planes which were in the air were directed to land at the nearest airport. International flights were diverted to alternate locations outside of the United States. Transportation Secretary Mineta has directed the Federal Aviation Administration to suspend operations until at least noon tomorrow. So no airline flights will operate until at least then, and until the FAA announces that operations will be resumed. Secretary Mineta has also issued orders controlling the movement of all vessels in United States navigable waters. The Federal Emergency Management Agency has activated 8 urban search and rescue task forces in New York, and 4 of these highly trained teams are at work here in Washington at the Pentagon. Every federal agency has implemented continuity of operations plans to make sure the government continues to function effectively. While the markets closed today because of the situation in Manhattan, the United States financial system has continued to operate. Banks have been open all day. The Federal Reserve has operated regularly and continuously. The Department of Health and Human Services has mobilized medical personnel and supplies to provide help to local authorities who are working so diligently to respond and try to help the victims of these terrible attacks. President Bush has committed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to identify and bring to swift justice those responsible